The last jar of strawberry jam I ever brought to my daughter's house sat on her kitchen counter for 3 weeks before she threw it away. I know, because I saw it in the trash when I went to pick up my reading glasses. She didn't know I'd seen it. I smiled, picked up my glasses, and drove home. That was the moment I understood that some things, once you see them clearly, cannot be unseen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Because the ending only makes sense if you know everything that came before it. I turned 63 the spring before all of this happened. I had retired 2 years earlier from 26 years of teaching 4th grade at Maplewood Elementary, just outside Columbus, Ohio. I had a house I owned outright, a pension that covered my needs, a garden I'd been tending for 30 years, and 2 grandchildren I loved more than I had ever loved anything in my life. My daughter Claire was 38. Her husband Derek was 41. They had a good house in a good suburb, 2 cars, and the kind of busy life that made them feel like they never had quite enough time or quite enough help. I was the help. I want to be careful how I say that, because I didn't mind being helpful. I genuinely didn't. When Claire was pregnant with their first, my grandson Wyatt, I started driving out to their house every Saturday morning, 45 minutes each way. I would arrive by 9, and I would stay until 5 or 6, sometimes later if they had dinner plans. I did this every week for 4 years. I fed Wyatt his breakfast, took him to the park, read him books until he fell asleep for his nap, and then I started the same routine with my granddaughter Lily when she came along 2 years after him. I watched them take their first steps in that living room. I taught Wyatt how to sound out words before he started kindergarten. I helped Lily learn to tie her shoes sitting on the kitchen floor with a piece of yarn. I was not being taken advantage of, I told myself. I was a grandmother. This was what grandmothers did. And every fall, from late August through October, I did what I had done every year since I was 40 years old. I picked strawberries and raspberries through the summer, then apples from the 2 trees along the back fence, and I spent my weekends standing over my big stock pot, making jam, strawberry preserves, raspberry jam, apple butter with cinnamon, and just a little brown sugar. Bread and butter pickles from the cucumbers that always grew faster than I could eat them. I lined them up on my pantry shelf in their neat little jars with the handwritten labels. And every time I went to Claire's house, I brought a bag of them. I had done this for 15 years. Since before Wyatt was born, since before Derek was in the picture. Honestly, Claire had grown up eating my jam on her toast every morning, and she knew, in the way that children know things about their mothers, that those jars represented something: time, attention, care, the smell of a whole summer distilled down into something you could open in January when the ground was frozen and everything outside was gray. Or at least, I thought she knew. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, I spent the better part of a day putting together what I thought was a beautiful basket. I used a wicker basket I'd had for years, lined it with a checked dish towel, and I arranged 12 jars inside it. 4 strawberry, 3 raspberry, 3 apple butter, and 2 of the pickles because Derek had once mentioned, years ago, that he liked them. I was genuinely proud of it. Standing in my kitchen looking at that basket, I felt the particular satisfaction that comes from giving someone something you made yourself, something that cost you real time and real effort, something that could not be replicated by a gift card or a 2-day shipping order. I drove out on Thanksgiving morning with the basket in the back seat and a pecan pie I had also made from scratch on the front passenger seat so it wouldn't slide. The house was full by the time I arrived. Derek's parents were there, his brother and sister-in-law, a couple of Claire's friends from work. 15 people altogether, maybe. Loud and warm and full of the kind of chaos that big family holidays produce. I set the basket on the kitchen island, and Claire saw it and said, "Oh, Mom, you brought jam again." Not unkindly. Just the way you say something you've said many times before. The way you say something that has become ordinary, I had not noticed until that exact moment that my jam had become ordinary. Derek came into the kitchen for something and saw the basket. He lifted the dish towel, looked inside, and he laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly. More the laugh of someone who finds something mildly amusing. 12 jars, he said. That's some operation you've got going, Mom. He looked at Claire. I keep telling her she could sell this stuff at the farmer's market. He laughed again, picked up a jar of apple butter, turned it over, set it back down. Honestly, with all the trouble you go to, it would have been easier to just order something from Harry and David, but hey. He shrugged. That's your thing. That's your thing. Claire laughed a little, the way wives laugh at their husbands when they're not quite agreeing but not quite disagreeing either. She patted my arm. It's sweet, Mom. We love your jam. I smiled. I said, I'm glad. I went to go find Wyatt and Lily, but I kept hearing it all through dinner. That's your thing. As though 15 years of jars and 45 minutes of driving every Saturday and 4 years of giving up my weekends were simply a quirk I had, a hobby that happened to be useful to them. Not love, not sacrifice. Not the deliberate, conscious choice of a woman who had reorganized her entire retirement around their convenience. Just my thing. I want to be honest with you. I did not have any grand realization that night. I drove home in the dark with my empty basket and my leftover pecan pie, and I mostly felt tired, the kind of tired that settles into your shoulders and doesn't leave when you sleep. I thought about my own mother. She had died 11 years earlier, and I still missed her every single day in the way that you miss people who were truly, unconditionally in your corner. She had made jam to blueberry and peach, mostly, because that was what grew in her part of rural Kentucky. She had given it to me in paper bags and cardboard boxes my whole adult life, and I had never once called it her thing. I had called it love, because that was what it was. December came. I still drove out on Saturdays because the children had nothing to do with any of this, and I was not going to punish Wyatt and Lily for something they hadn't done. But I did not bring any jars. I told myself it was because I hadn't had time to make more. I was not quite ready to admit what was actually happening inside me. What was actually happening was that I was paying attention in a way I had not allowed myself to before. I started noticing things I had explained away for years. The way Claire would call me on a Friday evening and say, Mom, something came up, can you come tomorrow? And it was never a question. Really. The way Derek would say, thank you, in that distracted, passing way, the same tone he used to thank the grocery store bagger. The Christmas when Lily had turned 4 and I had spent 3 weeks crocheting her a little stuffed rabbit, and Derek had looked at it and said, That's so cute. She's really into Peppa Pig right now, though, so we might pick up some toys she'll actually play with. Lily had played with that rabbit for a year, but I remembered how I'd felt standing there, holding it out, watching him look past it. I remembered the summer I had offered to take the kids for 2 weeks so Claire and Derek could take a real vacation, just the two of them. To Italy, the trip Claire had been talking about since college. I had cleared my calendar, arranged everything, told them I was ready. They had gone. They had come back tanned and happy and showed me the photos, and Derek had said, best decision we ever made, and Claire had squeezed his hand, and neither of them had said anything else. I hadn't expected a parade, but a thank you that lasted more than 5 seconds would have meant something. January was cold. I drove out on Saturdays. I smiled and made lunch and read books and drove home. I didn't bring anything except myself. Then, one Saturday in late January, Claire called me at 8 in the morning. I was in my garden shed, getting some things organized, a project I'd been putting off. She said, Mom, I know this is last minute, but Derek has a work thing tonight, and I got invited to Jennifer's birthday dinner, and can you come early and stay late? Like, until 10 or 11? I stood in my shed with my phone in my hand, and I looked at my workbench and my seed packets, and the little chart I'd made of what I was going to plant where come spring. I said, "I'm sorry, honey. I already have plans today." There was a pause. "Plans? What kind of plans?" I said, "Just some things I need to take care of. I hope you find someone." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, it's not really, I kind of need someone I can count on." And there it was. Not a thank you for 4 years of every Saturday. Not an acknowledgement of what I gave up, or what I drove, or how I rearranged my life. Just an expectation, stated plainly, that I would be available because I had always been available, and that being available was simply my role. Not something I chose, just something I was. I said, gently but clearly, "You can count on me, Claire. But I do need a little more notice sometimes. I'll see you next Saturday, as usual." I hung up and stood in the cold shed for a long time, and then I went inside and made myself a cup of tea, and I felt something I can only describe as the relief of a window being opened in a room that had been closed too long. I didn't stop going on Saturdays, but I started saying no to the last-minute calls. I started keeping my Tuesday evenings, which I had been giving up without a second thought for years whenever Claire needed something. I started treating my own time as though it had value, which, it turned out, required practice. Claire was confused. I could see it when I arrived on Saturdays, a slight wariness, like she wasn't quite sure which version of me she was going to get. I was the same person I had always been with the children, but I had stopped performing eagerness for the adults. In March, I went to the doctor for my annual checkup, and my doctor told me my blood pressure was down from the previous year. She asked what I'd changed. I thought about it for a moment and said, "Easter came. The family gathered again at Claire's house. I brought a fruit basket I had ordered from a catalog, apples and pears and cheese wrapped in cellophane, the kind of thing you buy when you don't have time to make something." Claire opened it and looked at me with a funny expression. Not quite hurt, not quite understanding, and she said, "Oh, no jam this year?" I said, "I thought I'd try something different." I watched her set it on the counter next to the coffee maker, and I knew from the way she looked at it that she was noticing its absence the way we only notice things once they're gone. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I want you to understand that. I was not playing a game or teaching a lesson or executing some kind of revenge. I was simply no longer performing. Derek made a comment during dinner, joking with his brother, saying something about store-bought everything now, even from Grandma. He laughed. I smiled and said nothing. After dinner, I was washing dishes in the kitchen alone, something else I had always done without being asked, and Wyatt came in. He was 7 by then, missing a front tooth, wearing the striped shirt I had bought him for his birthday. He climbed up on the stool beside the sink and watched me for a while the way children watch you when they have something on their mind. He said, "Grandma, how come you didn't bring the jam?" I looked at him. I said, "I didn't make any this year." He thought about this. Then he said, "The kind from the store doesn't taste the same." I turned off the water and dried my hands, and I put my arms around him and held him for a moment. He let me, which 7-year-olds don't always do. "No," I said, into the top of his head. I drove home that evening through the spring dark, and I cried a little, not from sadness exactly, but from the particular emotion that has no clean name, the feeling of understanding something completely for the first time, even something that hurts. The following Saturday, Claire and I were alone in the kitchen while Derek took the kids to the park. We had been circling each other for months, and I think she knew it, and I think she had been working herself up to something. She turned from the counter and she looked at me with the expression she'd had as a teenager when she wanted something and wasn't sure how to ask for it. She said, "Mom, are you upset with me?" I said, "No, because you seem different." I took my time with my answer. I had been practicing taking my time rather than rushing to reassure. I said, "I'm not upset, Claire. I've been doing some thinking. That's all." about how I spend my time, what I want these years to look like. She was quiet. Then she said, "I hope you know how much we appreciate everything you do." And I looked at her, my daughter, whom I had raised and loved and taught and worried over and driven to every practice and performance and appointment, and I said, very quietly, "I know you love me. I've never doubted that. But appreciation and love aren't always the same thing, are they?" She didn't say anything for a while. I could see her working through it, the way people do when something lands that they weren't prepared for. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said finally. I said, "I know. That's partly my fault. I spent a long time making it very easy not to notice." She sat down at the table. I sat down across from her. The kids were at the park. The house was quiet in a way it rarely was. I didn't list grievances. I didn't bring up every Saturday or the Italy trip or the crocheted rabbit or Thanksgiving and the 12 jars. I just said that I had realized, not recently but slowly over a long time, that I had been giving without ever expecting anything in return, which is a fine way to give, but that I had also been giving in a way that asked to be invisible, and that was something I needed to stop. I told her I loved coming to see the children. I told her I wanted to keep doing it, but I needed her to understand that it was a choice I was making, not a service I was providing, and that the difference mattered to me even if it didn't look any different from the outside. Claire was quiet for a long time. Her eyes were bright in a way that told me she was fighting back something. She said, "I took you for granted." Not a question, just the clear-eyed naming of it. I said, "Yes, you did. I'm sorry, Mom." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I said, "I know you are," and I meant it. I did not say it to end the conversation or paper over the wound. I said it because I believed her, and because I knew that the knowing and the sorry were the beginning of something different, not the end of something broken. Summer came. I planted my garden the way I always had strawberries along the south fence, cucumbers on the trellis, 2 long rows of tomatoes, and the apple trees doing what they had always done, slow and steady and reliable. I spent time out there in the early mornings before it got hot, and I thought about a lot of things. My mother and her blueberry jam, the sound Wyatt had made the first time he tried my strawberry preserves at age 2, this enormous, happy noise of pure surprise, like he hadn't known something could taste like that. In August, I started making jam again. I didn't tell anyone. I made it for myself. First, I'd been eating store-bought for months, and Wyatt was right. It wasn't the same. I made small batches at first and stood at my counter in the evening, eating it on toast, and I remembered how much I loved the actual doing of it, separate from giving it to anyone. The smell of fruit and sugar on the stove, the particular sound of the lids sealing as the jars cooled. It had always been mine before it was ever theirs, and I'd forgotten that. By October, my pantry shelf was full again. I brought a bag to Claire's one Saturday in November, just 3 jars, without ceremony. I set it on the counter and I said, "I had a good strawberry crop this year. Nothing more." She picked up one of the jars and looked at it for a moment. She said, "Thank you, Mom." "I mean that." I said, "I know you do." Derek came in and saw the jars and he said, "Oh, the good stuff. I've missed this." And he said it the way people say things when they've had time to think about what something meant, which is a very different tone from the way he'd said things before. People can change in their small ways when the world shifts around them just enough. Wyatt came running in from the backyard and stopped when he saw the bag on the counter and said, "Is that Grandma's jam?" I said, "It is." He said, "The real kind?" I laughed. Out loud, genuinely. I said, "The real kind." He looked at me with that earnest, uncomplicated love that children have before they learn to complicate everything, and he said, "Grandma, yours is the best." I thought about 12 jars in a wicker basket on a Thanksgiving counter. I thought about, "That's your thing," said with a laugh. I thought about the jar in the trash that I'd found when I came for my glasses. I thought about all the years I had walked into that house carrying something I'd made with my hands and my time and my love, and how I had let myself believe that because no one said much about it, it didn't matter. And then I thought about this small boy, standing in front of me in his muddy sneakers, and the absolute certainty in his voice when he said, "Yours is the best," and I understood something I want to tell you clearly. The value of what we give is not determined by whether the people we give it to recognize it. Some of them will, and some of them won't, and the ones who don't will usually come around eventually if we stop making it so easy to take us for granted. But even if they never do, even if not a single person ever says the right thing at the right moment, what we make with our hands still carries what we put into it. It doesn't become worthless just because someone failed to see it clearly. It was never about them seeing it. It was always about the making of it. My mother understood this. I just needed 63 years to catch up to her. I still drive out on Saturdays, 45 minutes each way, through whatever the Ohio weather has decided to do. But now, when I pull into the driveway, I do it because I want to be there, because those children are the best part of my week, and I have stopped pretending that duty and desire are the same thing. They are not. Desire is what remains when you strip away obligation, and it is so much cleaner and lighter to carry. Last Saturday, I taught Wyatt how to make jam. He stood on his step stool beside me at Claire's stove, very serious, holding the wooden spoon with both hands, watching the strawberries break down into something syrupy and brilliant red. He asked me how I knew when it was ready. I said, "You put a little on a cold plate and run your finger through it. If it holds its shape, it's done." He tried it. He ran his finger through the bright dot of jam on the plate and watched it hold its line. He looked up at me with that wide-eyed satisfaction of a child who has just seen something work. "It's ready," he said. I said, "It is." Claire was watching from the doorway. She didn't say anything. She just smiled at me. A real smile. The kind that knows what it's looking at. I smiled back. I have a full pantry shelf again. 12 jars, give or take, each one labeled in my handwriting. Strawberry, raspberry, apple butter, bread and butter pickles for the people who want them. I made every one of them myself.